We didn't do any research. You know, you would think if you were starting like this, you'd go into the library and you'd research how dolls were made for the last 100 years and things like that. We didn't do that. We just went and made it.
I don't think anybody could do that today. I think the reason we were able to do it is because we were a little nuts. We had no fear.
This product, in all its complexity, was born and created and had samples in 1 year.
The action figure aisle in all of the toy stores that moms and dads go into was never there. It started with G.I. Joe, Action Soldier. He was the grandpa of it.
The thing that is most surprising is the success with which this toy had in such a short period of time.
Because it's G.I. Joe that put me through college. If it hadn't been for Joe, I'm not sure I would have been able to go to college.
He was our buddy. He was a generation's buddy that the kids took to war, took to bed, confided in, and blew the hell out of it.
On the land, on the sea, and in the air.
There's a fellow named Stan Weston, and over the years he and I became friendly, and a very creative fella, and he handled the licensing of the Munsters and the monster characters in Frankenstein. I wanted to use those, and what we did is we would license them and give the companies a royalty and an advance and things like that. And in 1963, I went to Toy Fair, which is always in New York, in February, and Stan said to me, come on up, I want to show you something, and we talked for a while. And during the conversation, he said, you know, Barbie and Ken do very well, but nobody's got a movable action figure, a boy figure. Ken really isn't an action figure. She's sort of there as the consort to Barbie. And he started to tell me about what he thought would be interesting, and trying to play poker face, I said, yeah, that's very interesting. And I left his office and I said, my goodness, this is exactly my kind of thing. I think it could be exciting. And as fate would have it, I walked down the street. It was on 55th Street in New York in Manhattan. And it probably still is there. There was an art supply store called Art Brown. And in the window were these wooden dolls that artists and sculptors and people like that used to pose for figure artwork and sculpturing. And I went in and I bought about a dozen of those. And I brought them back to Rhode Island and met with a very small staff of people in my office. And I said, I think I've got something here very exciting. And I talked about a movable figure. It just so happened that Sam Spears, who was the head of product development, Jerry Einhorn, which was in marketing in my division, Janet Downing, who was sort of the lady that took care of us all and yet was very creative.
He was presenting the proposal, which was, as he called it, a marriage between the Barbie doll, which is very, very popular, and military product lines for small kids.
Right away, old Sam says, I don't want a boy's doll, especially if we're going to dress him. I had a 5-year-old son, my wife and I, at that time, and I couldn't see a boy's doll. He says it's to be dressed in military uniform.
I said to myself, and then said it out loud, that I think we should stop thinking about this as a doll and said, always refer to it as a soldier, a G.I. Joe.
And I jumped up and said, well, you can't use G.I. Joe. That belongs to Bill Malden from the story of G.I. Joe. How can we use somebody else's property?
Don Levine looked at me at that point and said, well, okay, Jan, use that as a name for now until we get a better one.
It was going to be called a soldier. Immediately, I felt differently about it.
A soldier with uniforms and stuff. And when I heard this, naturally the first thing that popped into my head was, hey, Barbie's got the girls, we're going to get the boys.
This is G.I. Joe, Action Soldier. Here is the basic package, and an exciting package it is with beautiful 4-color action illustrations. But Hasbro gives to the boys of America more than just a sensational new kind of soldier. Hasbro introduces a whole new concept in playing soldier. To go with G.I. Joe Action Soldier, there is box after box of regulation military gear, different kinds of uniforms, all sorts of battle equipment, authentic G.I. Joe material with everything from combat to bivouac, from MP to command post, helmets, rifles, tents, flags, sandbags, machine guns, everything carefully reproduced down to the last detail. But this is just the beginning. In this giant new concept, Hasbro brings to the youth of America not only G.I. Joe Action Soldier, but also G.I. Joe Action Marine, G.I. Joe Action Sailor, and G.I. Joe Action Pilot. 4 G.I. Joes, 4 different services.
3 or 4 of us had been in the military. I was in Korea and the boys were in the service, and it was very comfortable for us to say, wait a minute, we could do a machine gun, or we could do a hand grenade. It wasn't foreign to us. We had been veterans in military, and most times in combat.
And everybody at once started saying, hey, we could do this and we can do that, and we get uniforms and we get this and we get weapons and this and that and that. And for a few minutes it was almost like chaos until we calmed down.
I think it was Janet or somebody saying, I think it's a great idea, but Don, Mr. Hassenfeld is not going to let us be in the doll business.
It was violating a couple of his taboos, one of which was a doll, another was guns.
We would love to get in the doll business, but every time we tried, it was very unsuccessful.
He always said, this is not for us. If we're going to be in the doll business, we better buy a doll company. We know nothing about it. Very competitive business. And my attitude was, well, this is not a doll. This is a soldier. Come on, Don, it's still a doll, right? And this was the concern that they had. But as we started to get into this, the enthusiasm and the excitement started to build.
So Joe was going to be the same size as Bobby, proportioned differently, but that was the stature.
Actually, nobody could really do anything until we had actual models, products to work with.
Don had in the office at that time, I believe, was an artist mannequin. And he says, this should be articulated. And I agreed wholeheartedly. In fact, after I saw the mannequin, I figured this thing has got to be able to pose. But I'm not sure everybody else understood what I meant pose. I wanted to him, if he was going to throw a grenade, his arm would hold that position and not fall down by the weight of the grenade. Or if he had a backpack, he wouldn't fall on his face.
There was no reason to have a movable soldier if he couldn't move and he couldn't get behind the wheel of a Jeep or go into a foxhole or jump off a roof with a parachute. Up to that point, all of these soldiers had been plastic soldiers or die-cast metal soldiers. So this idea of a movable doll and the joints in the wooden doll seemed to be, the timing was perfect.
If Norman, Walter, and I could make a soldier that was posable, we'd have a great item.
A soldier big enough to really play with. But look, G.I. Joe doesn't just stand. He kneels. He lifts his arms to fire a rifle. He can charge, or he can sit down and rest. He can throw a grenade or crouch in a foxhole. He can perform every action of a soldier because Hasbro's G.I. Joe has 21 movable parts. His head turns, his arms move, he bends his elbow, his wrists move. He can turn from left to right.
One of the key words in this entire G.I. Joe project from the very first day was secrecy. And that very first day when Don Levine told us about this idea room, we started talking about it. He said, we tell nobody, it doesn't leave this office, not even other people in the department yet. Nobody's to hear about this. Don't even tell your wife, your wives, because women go to the supermarket with their friends and they start talking, and before you know it, somebody hears something and mentions it to somebody, and next thing you know, another company's coming out with what we're doing. Knockoffs were very, very prevalent in the toy business.
We really wanted G.I. Joe equipment to be authentic. So I went to Don and I said, do you suppose we could get rifles and grenades and bring them in here so that we can measure them and reduce them to G.I. Joe size? He said, why not? I'll get Jerry on the ball right away.
The first place I decided to go to was the Armory of the Mounted Command, the National Guard Armory. The commander of that was the Adjutant General of the state of Rhode Island, Leonard Holland. Wherever I went, I had to concoct some stories about why I wanted what I wanted. And I went to General Holland. I told him that we were thinking of coming out with a line of backyard toys for kids to play soldier. And gee, what a great idea. I said, yeah, but General, I need weapons. I want an M1 rifle, I want a carbine, I want a .30 caliber machine gun, a .50 caliber machine gun, and a BAR. And he just sat there looking at me. And he had a hell of a sense of humor. And he said, who are you going to declare war on? I said, we're going to take over Central Falls. But he said, he called in his assistant, at that time Captain Nick Anicelli, and he said, give him what he needs. Drove back to Central Falls, and one by one brought the stuff upstairs and had to walk through the main office to get to the steps to go up to our offices. And everybody's looking, what is he doing with these weapons?
Big weapons through the corridors, weaving their way through the secretaries and everything up to our stairs and climbing up the stairs. All these young women, eyes as big as saucers.
We lined them up outside the door, and anybody who would venture up those stairs would be facing all these weapons, the .50 caliber machine gun, or .30 caliber on the tripods, just looking you right in the eye. And that was our starting point.
Some equipment couldn't be found, so I went to Jerry Einhorn and said, hey Jerry, we need blueprints if you can't find the actual item.
Blueprints? Who is going to give me the blueprints? I called General Holland again, and I told him what I really needed. And he said, the Springfield Armory in Springfield, Massachusetts, has all the blueprints to all the small arms in the U.S. arsenal.
Take a look at G.I. Joe's battle gear, a new kind of action realism in playing soldier. All of his gear, from canteen and mess kit to .30 caliber machine gun, from entrenching tools and field pack to communication equipment, is all regulation gear, designed from official Army and Navy blueprints. And each piece of gear scaled to size so that it fits. The canteen cover fits over the canteen. The canteen clips onto the cartridge belt, and the cartridge belt fits over the uniform. This is G.I. Joe Action Soldier.
Then came the uniforms, and that was a little tougher. Where am I going to get the uniforms? I called all different Army Navy stores. I called several in New York City, in Boston, and one of the guys in Boston said to me, there is a warehouse on the Chelsea waterfront where this man has a warehouse full of war surplus, everything you can think of. I said, what does he use it for? He said, he's shipping it to South America. Seemed like every month down in South America at that time, in the 60s, there was a revolution in a different country, and this guy was just supplying the stuff. He told me where it was, and I walk in, and I see, as far as the eye can see, mounds of uniforms and weapons and parts and everything. And all of a sudden, from my left, a little guy walks over and says, can I help you? In a voice just like that. And I said, yeah, I need some of this stuff. He said, what for? So here again, I had to think fast, and I said, well, I represent the University of Rhode Island, and we're adding to our museum. We're adding a wing dedicated to World War II. And we need actual things to put on display. He says, take what you want.